All right, we're back. It is COMP125. That's client-side web development at Centennial. And we are week 2, lesson 2, part 3 of our broadcast. Again, we just finished off doing our first quiz. A reminder, we will be doing quizzes every other week. So not next week, but the week after, we'll be doing a quiz. And of course, there won't be any quizzes during exam week, right? That will be silly to do an exam and then a quiz too, right? So you won't have that. So you have 3 quizzes, typically front loaded. So you might have like 3 quizzes and 3 labs in the first half of the semester. And then the second half of the semester, you'll have 2 quizzes and 2 labs. Typically, that's how I do it. And the reason why is because there's usually stuff going on the last part of the semester. You got like assignments flying, different things happening, and I don't want to kill you with additional work. So that's why I ease off on the second half of the semester, right? But the assignments are a little bigger, so that you just expect those things to happen too. Okay, where last we left off, we're kicking off an assignment here in Visual Studio Code. And again, if you have a blank screen like this, I'm just going to put up COMP125 here. I'm going to drag and drop lesson 2, right? For those of you who are following along up online on GitHub, and I'm going to go to GitHub for a second to show you the GitHub repo that I'm using. I got 2 going on. I'm going to stop that after today. Remember, I'm only going to do it one way, and then you guys can manage your Visual Studio or your Dreamweaver or your Atom or whatever IDE you're using on your own. As long as you connect to GitHub, you're good to go. But after today, I'm not going to intercut between Visual Studio and Visual Studio Code. You should understand that they're the same, right? Pretty much what I'm doing. So if I look at, if I go to Centennial, and you can see that there are a couple of versions of my repositories. One of them is Visual Studio. If you're a Visual Studio person, the other one is a VS Code. This is the one that I'm looking at right now, right? And if you look at the index.html, it's pretty simple, right? There's nothing going on here except for this first paragraph. And also from a content perspective, app.css is pretty empty, right? And if I go back, you can look at scripts. Scripts app.js is pretty empty, except for these lines here we're going to talk about again. It's alive. Right, so that's what I'm looking at in terms of our GitHub repository. Let's take a look at our code. So if I look at an index.html here in VS Code, you can see that I've got a hello world and I've got a paragraph element with first paragraph as an ID. Now I just quizzed you on it. Remember I talked about this. You cannot modify something easily. I'll put that disclaimer. Easily in HTML without a couple of things here first. One, you need to have a link to your JavaScript document. Notice that we're treating JavaScript just like an external document like CSS. And up to this point, I haven't talked about JavaScript inline too much, but you could do it. If I really wanted to, I could create a in between these 2 JavaScript tags, I could put free-flowing JavaScript. But you wouldn't do that necessarily most times because it's page-specific, and we want to not be page-specific. All right, we don't want to do it that way. We want to make it so that we do it so that one JavaScript document can apply to multiple pages. One typically with what we want to do, right? And just like we do CSS, we talked about progressive enhancement, where we do structure first, HTML, CSS, which is our style. We haven't got any style yet, and JavaScript, which is our behavior. Those 3 things. Okay, so first we have to link to the page. Second, and make sure that the path is correct. That's really important too. Second, our app.js, right? We have this funny structure here called an IFI. That's the short form for talking about it, right? An immediately invoked function expression, or also called an anonymous self-executing function, or a closure, right? All these names are accurate. You can talk about them all as a closure or immediately invoked function expression. The most correct one is IIFE, immediately invoked function expression, which what it does is it creates a scope between this curly brace and this one. So in between these curly braces, any variable I declare is considered local to this scope. Now I didn't talk about this too much, use strict, but basically it helps us with debugging, right? So it doesn't allow us to redeclare variables again and again, as well as it doesn't allow us to do things like, now that I've declared this as first paragraph, it doesn't allow me to declare this as something else without creating an error. It'll come up as an error or warning, okay? Okay, so here's my code. I've got my console.log. We're going to be using console.log and we're not going to use document.write ever. Right? We talked about that last time. Document.write is bad practice. We don't do that ever. And the reason for that is even for even for a quick and dirty debugging, I don't want to use document.write because it can give us wrong results. Okay, we don't want that. We don't want that to happen. I'm just going to bring the PowerPoint presentation up here in a second. So that's one. The other thing is that I need to do two things. In order for me to affect the page, I need to use some kind of, I need to wire up the page somehow. I'm going to talk about it as me wiring up the page. I have my elements, and then I want to link to an element, and I've done that with this first paragraph. Okay, and I've just assigned the text content of the paragraph with just a simple code. It's alive, right? So how does this code execute, right? Well, remember what happens is because this JavaScript is added or connected to my index.html, it starts here, right down here at the bottom. So the way the interpreter works for the browser, it kind of goes down, looks at each line, line by line, reads them all in, finally gets down to here, to line 19 here in my example, and it executes the code that's in the app.js in order. So then it starts at the top. It starts at line 1, goes to line 2, up to line 3, realizes this whole thing is a closure, an object, basically. That's what this thing is, right? And then it says, okay, so what am I going to do with this thing? If I didn't have these two things here at the end, wouldn't work. You need these last two brackets because these last two brackets, it's almost like a way of calling itself. It's almost like, is there a way, if I can call myself somehow, right, as a method and immediately invoke, that's why it's called an immediately invoked function expression. I don't have to wait for the page to load. Okay, we're talking about functions today though, right? Because one of the things we want to talk about in our current PowerPoint presentation is functions. What if I wrap this code in a function, all right? And we got to talk about what functions are, right? There's a couple ways of making functions, all right? And one of the ways of creating a function is with the keyword function, right? Like we see up here. That's the function, right? And there's a way like this. You say function, try this out with me, right? And we want to say, we want to kind of write to first paragraph. That's the function. Write to first paragraph. That's our function. And that's the name of the function. So the first thing is the function keyword, and then the name of the function. And think about this, if you've done C# or another programming language, remember that everything in JavaScript is case sensitive. And just like a method, we're calling a method, once we declare the method, this is the method declaration, and we can call it with the method name, okay? I'm not gonna give it any parameters right now, but I am gonna create these curly braces here. So the curly braces, notice that this function, this is the nature of JavaScript, so please forgive me if it looks weird, right? This function lives inside this other function. This is the main anonymous function here, this iffy here, right? Notice that this function here, write to first paragraph, is a named function, okay? That's what it's called, a named function. So let's write that in. So this is a named function, right? This is one way of writing a function. And then in here, what we can do is you can call it something like this. We can say, we can take this code, right? And we can cut it. And we can put it inside our main function. Okay. For what you know from programming, will this function execute? Will this do anything other than say app started in the console? Who said no? You're right. It will not do anything because I'm just declaring the function here. I'm not calling it anywhere in here, right? Well, I don't need a return, but I'm not calling it right now. I'm not calling this function anyway. I've created a named, think about this as a container again. I've got this container that I'm gonna execute. And the reason why I want to write a function is why? Like any method, I want to reuse my code somehow. I want to call that function over and over again, typically. If you're going to make a named function, this is the rule in JavaScript, right? Make sure you're going to reuse it. If you're not going to reuse the function, you can make it anonymous. We'll talk about how we're going to do that in a second, all right? This way of doing things, this named function methodology, right? This has a bit more overhead, all right, let's just say, than the other ways that I'm going to show you, okay? But it's easier for us to understand. If we look at function as a keyword, and then just like we would do in other languages, we have to name the function right here. This is one way, okay? How do I execute this function? Well, there's a couple ways we can do that. One of them is down here somewhere after it's been declared, write the name, right to first paragraph, right? Here's where we execute it. Execute function, right? There's some rules around this stuff, and I have to talk to you about this, and it's pretty serious, and it's what people love and hate about JavaScript in a second, I'll tell you. So we're going to declare, that's what we're doing here, we're declaring a name function. Okay, so we're declaring a name function, and then we're executing that function. Okay, let's see if it runs. So I'm going to open this up in my Finder or in Explorer if you're a Windows person, right? And I'm going to double click on index.html, and still says it's alive. That's a good sign, right? If I refresh. And if I go back to view page source, you can see that nothing's changed on my page source. And if I go to right click and inspect, I can see that on the console, I just have app started. So here's a really good debugging tip that I recommend to you. Whenever you write a function for the first time, right, to keep it simple, write yourself a little console.log that says executing right to first program. It's not going to cost you anything except for a little bit of runtime, right? So what I do is we'll do one of these. I say console.log. I'll say executing, right to first program, right to first paragraph. And the reason why I do that is because it kind of tells me where I'm at, right, when I'm programming. Okay, I'm just going to leave a little space there. Just for debugging purposes. That's what this is for. For debugging only. Every time I do a console out, in fact, I'm actually doing that. I'm kind of, even the app started idea, I'm just turning it on so I can see what's going on in the console. My console is my friend, okay? I'm talking about the browser console here, okay? If I don't have feedback, it becomes more challenging to troubleshoot without using built-in debugging tools of an editor. But if you're somebody who doesn't like to use debugging tools, console outs are pretty good, right? Let's talk about this. What does this mean? So if I look up back to Chrome for a second, and if I run this thing, open it in Reveal in Explorer or Finder, and I double-click on my index.html, and if I go back to Inspect, and if I look at my console, you can see that app started, and then executing right to first paragraph, that function is being executed. So I know I'm in there. If it gets here to this, it executes this line, that means I'm inside my function, right? Makes sense. When I do console log here on line 9, right, I'm in the main iffy, the closure here. I'm in this closure. So I know I got there somehow. If this line executes, that means I'm executing my closure, right? And if this line executes on line 16, right, then it looks like I'm inside this function. Okay, I got to talk about scope again, okay, so you guys understand. When I talk about scope, think about it as a code block, any code block, and I got 2 code blocks right now. There's one big one, this one, right? From here all the way down to the bottom. That's one scope. That is called, we're talking about this local scope that's inside the iffy. This, you may think this is global scope, but it's not. Global scope is not this. Global scope is up here, where there's no iffy. I can declare variables up here too, like this. Var Tom is equal to Tom, right? This is a global variable. It exists throughout my entire document, and as long as I connect it to my index.html, it'll exist and it'll parachute to every other document that exists in the global scope. This is why it's dangerous to put it up here, right? So this is global scope, right? Here we're inside this iffy scope. That's what I want to call it. We're inside the immediately invoked function expression, right? So if I want to access this variable, Tom, that exists that it got declared in global scope, I can access it inside my function, right? I can do that because it's up here in global scope. And it usually goes like this. It starts off global scope first. If I'm in global scope, every function, the thing within my document, or what we like to call the browser cache, Every time that page loads, that variable lives, right? And to show you this, if I go right into my first paragraph function, so I'm inside my IIFE, I go right into my first paragraph function, which is another scope, right? I can still have access to Tom by doing this. Console.log, and we'll say Tom, right? Notice also that it comes up with code hinting. If it comes up with code hinting, chances are you have access to it, right? And if I write this down, console.log Tom, it should give me Tom at the end. If I go back to my code and refresh, you can see now that I get Tom, right? Which means I have access to that object in global scope, right? This is dangerous because anything I declare out here, I want you to think about global scope as the, as the barren land, all right? There's been an apocalypse and zombies walk outside of whatchamacallit your IIFE, okay? If you put this poor guy Tom in the barren land in the apocalypse, right? Whatchamacallit HTML document can eat him, right? They'll consume him. The HTML documents in our example are the zombies, right? The zombies will eat them, every single one of them that are attached to your project, that have app.js attached to it. That's why it's bad. You don't want poor Tom to be in the apocalypse, right? In the barren land, right? When I'm behind my IIFE, I want you to think about it as the variables that are inside my IIFE are inside of a tower of defense, okay? Think of it this way. There's no way that you can have access to it unless I allow access, yes?
So anything from the global scope, like they'll be able to edit it and change it, but if they refresh it goes back to
correct. That's very good. So the question is, anything I put in my global scope, they can edit it, they can see it, they can change it. But when you refresh the page, it goes back to what it was. It's true. You can hack your code. Absolutely. You can hack your website right there. So if you see anything in the global scope, if you know that it's there, you can hack it. So that's why we don't put poor Tom in the wasteland, right? If you put Tom in the wasteland, right, he's an unhappy Tom, right? And I'll be unhappy when I mark your work. Yes. Accessors. Not so easy to do with JavaScript, pure JavaScript. You can do it with other languages and other helpers. With JavaScript, it's a little more challenging. It's not like it's not done. You can totally do it, and you can mimic it, accessors, because there is no. Remember, we're not talking about classical inheritance here. And the way JavaScript works, I'm talking ES5 now. ES6 is a totally different monster, and it's not ECMAScript. I'm talking about ECMAScript 6. The latest version of JavaScript is not fully supported across all browsers. The elements you're talking about, accessors there, but we can't use them right now with the confidence that they're going to work everywhere. Again, classes are not something that we use in JavaScript. We use functions, right? We don't use classical inheritance. We use prototypal inheritance, right? Prototypal programming, which is a totally different thing. We don't have classes and objects typically in ES5. In ES6, they exist, right? Okay, so we don't want to keep Tom in the global scope. Let's erase him eventually. But let's take a look here when I go back here. If I say down here into my my console, if I say, well, poor Tom, right? He's going to be equal to something else like Mark. I can do that, and you can see that Tom is now equal to Mark, right? I can also do a console.log, right? I can actually log in the console from the console, right? I can do console.log Tom and press enter, and you can see I'm going to get Mark. Right? Any kind of command that you can execute in your JavaScript file, I can execute here on the console. Be careful, right? If you're doing something like loops or some weird things like that, if there's no curly brace, you can't go to the next line. It's like one line. You got to put everything in one line, all right? So that's what it works. But like you said, I can modify I just modified my, the global variable. But if I want to access something else, right? Like I talked about before, if I want to try and access this variable in here, first paragraph, right? Because I haven't exposed it, if I go first paragraph here, right? See how it's not coming up with code hinting? It says, one thing it does do, we see in my index.html, we see this, and see how it says it's alive, right? Because that's what's being printed in my index.html. First paragraph is an ID, and that's why it's coming up. But I can't modify it. Unless I do something like this, first paragraph, and if I try and do something like Innerhtml, right? If I try and do this, it won't work. Is equal to, I don't know, goodbye. doesn't work, right? Like any JavaScript attached to an item, like first paragraph doesn't exist. But first paragraph, the ID, yeah, it'll come up as an ID that's inside of my paragraph. Sorry? Yes and no.
So what is the meaning of undefined in that after mark?
Oh yes, this is good. It means that whenever I'm in the console, you might get an undefined. Don't worry about what that means because I'm pressing enter as well, right? And you're going to get some undefineds. But the thing to understand is when I do console.log tom, right, you might get some of these extra spaces in here. Just ignore them, right? It means that this whole, this expression is undefined. I don't have a name for it. You can attach a name to it, yeah. Well, we don't have it. It's not working anyway. But Innerhtml is similar to content or text content or, the HTML as an example that's inside of my document. Yes. Okay, let's try it again. So I'll go for first paragraph. Thank you. First paragraph. Thank you. Dot. Oh, here it is. Innerhtml. That's what I was thinking. Innerhtml. And then if I make that equal to goodbye, because I've defined it, right? I press enter, it changes. Right? So thank you for that. So notice that it changed. Instead of undefined, we have goodbye in these brackets now because I've modified it. Innerhtml refers to, it's a property of first paragraph, right? This paragraph right here, right? And remember that we talked about the whole pregnant thing? I know, I kind of I try to make some funny stuff up so that way you remember, but think about it this way, right? First paragraph is the child of the body, right? Body is the parent, first paragraph is the immediate child. It's also a sibling, brother, sister, of the h1 tag, right? As well as the script tag, right? The script tag is the brother and sister, or whatever you want to call it, a sibling of the paragraph tag and the h1 tag. Simple. But also, because the paragraph tag lies inside the body, which lies inside the HTML document, you could say that the HTML document is also the grandfather or grandparent, if you will, right? If you want to talk about grandfathers and grandparents, right, of this element. It's also the parent. It's the parent of the parent of my node. Each node, they're all called nodes, exists in that order. They're kind of nested inside your HTML document. So in order for you to do JavaScript correctly, you need to do two things. You need to really understand your HTML. If your HTML sucks, your JavaScript sucks. Okay, that's how it goes. If your HTML is ugly, JavaScript can't save you, right? And that's why we create a hook like this called first paragraph. Okay, let's go back. So we talked about this is a named function. Let's just comment this out. So I'm just going to do one of these. And I'm going to come to down here like this, and we're going to comment this out. Right? This is a named function. Let's try it with a different way of doing it. We can use the var keyword as well, like this, var, right? And we can say something like, write to first paragraph. Write to first paragraph is equal to function, right? Like this. We can also do this as well. And I'm just going to copy all this stuff here, right? Copy and put it inside here. Paste, and you can see that this is another form of it. So this is a interesting thing. We have an anonymous function. Here's the anonymous function piece, right? Right here. That we assign this keyword, this variable, as an alias. So this is an anonymous function, and this is a word we assign to it, a variable that we point to it. Okay, so you're going to see it being written both ways, this way, as well as this way. By the way, if you notice, they both work the exact same way. Overhead. Let's talk about overhead. This method, the way it's written here and the way it's interpreted in JavaScript, has more overhead slightly than this method, this way of doing it. Okay, but both are correct. What would you say the advantage of this method might be? Is there an advantage of this method in some way? It's the same. I mean, it's really, in my opinion, if you look at it, if I hover over right to first paragraph, take a look at the code editing I'm getting. It says, I get right to first paragraph returns, it's interesting, a function, it's actually a type of function that returns void. That's what this right to first paragraph is. And it's a local variable that exists in my scope. If I hover over this one, if I take these things away for a second, and let me just put them back over below. So I put them here instead, just as a test. Right, so here it is. And if I hover over this one, it says right to first paragraph is void. This is what it returns. It actually returns void. But look what it says. It doesn't say local variable. It says local function. See how it says that? Local function? This one doesn't say that. It said local variable. Two different things. One is a variable that points to an anonymous function. It looks almost exactly the same, behaves almost exactly the same, but it's not the same. Okay, just letting you know. JavaScript treats it differently. But up online, you might see both examples, this way or this way. Okay, a named function, and this way is called a variable that points to an anonymous function. It's a totally different way of doing things. You can intermingle both. However, I recommend for you as beginners, you stick with this one. It's easier to understand function and right to first paragraph, and not have this extra keyword var over here, because that means you need to declare it first. Also, this variable, right? Take a look at what I'm doing here. So what I'm actually doing here is saying this. I say declare a variable that points to an anonymous function. That's what I'm really doing here. That's a different way of doing it. This is the anonymous function bit, and this is the variable that points to it. I want you to think of it that way, not like right to first paragraph is a function. Yes, it is, because it points to a function. So you can treat it as like a function. But it's not a function. It's a variable that points to a function. It's a pointer. Okay? That's why JavaScript is hard to learn. And when you look at it, it looks like spaghetti code, because anyone who writes it can write it different ways. There's advantages to this we'll talk about later on in the course. Right now, no. Okay, so those are the two ways, primary ways of writing functions, two ways. There's a third way too, what we'll talk about later on. For example, what if, here's something I want you to want to talk about. What if I make another variable like this underneath here, right? And I want to call this variable alias. It's not a keyword, right? And that equals to right to first paragraph. What am I doing here? Alias is equal to right to first paragraph. It's actually an alias of an alias, right? Well, actually, I can execute alias just like I would right to first paragraph. When I say alias, I want you to think about it as the same thing. It's almost like a short name for it. Like, you know what? My real name is Anastasius. Real life, this is true. So if you know anything about me, my real name is Anastasius. It's a really long name, and people can't pronounce it, right? You know, some people who are, you know, Russian, they get it. You know, Greeks, they understand how to pronounce it. But most people, they look at Anastasius, they're like, holy crap, that's a big name, Tom, right? So when I was younger, and here's the example for you to remember, right? My mom said, so what would you like to be known as, right? Would you like Tom or Tim or Tony? I said, no, I don't want Tony, and I don't want Tim. I want Tom. Tom originally was my alias. I was known as Tom, but my real name is Anastasius. Later on, I changed it, so Tom is my real name. But that's how an alias functions. Think about it as a name referring to something else. It's an alias. You can call that person something, you know, like another way of thinking about an alias is, you know, like a nickname, right? I was talking to some friends of mine who come from Trinidad. Anyone come from Trinidad over here? No? Trinidad, one of my friends says to me, you know, we call a guy Kokiai, right? This guy's name is Kokiai, right? Well, how is his name Kokiai? It's not his real name. His name is Brad or something, right? But the reason why they call him Kokiai is because he's got one eye that looks like this, right? But everyone calls him that, so that's his name, right? That's how they do it, right? In certain parts of the world, they have nicknames. And so think about an alias like a nickname, right? A name that I can use instead of or in place of the other official name, okay? So this is bad and good, because what I can do is I can say something like this. I can say, here's my right to first paragraph. I'm creating a pointer or an alias to this anonymous function, right? Which works the exact same way. And this alias, which I should call alias, right? It actually points to my alias. I can do this as many times as I want. Yes, it does. And that's why, I told you before, that's why JavaScript, either you love it or you hate it, right? You love it because it's flexible. You hate it because it's flexible, right? You don't want, most developers, they want structure, right? They're like military commanders, right? They want hierarchy, right? But there's, you know, JavaScript is so flexible, you can make it so that it can do a lot of different things. You could even make it so flexible that it'll hang yourself too, right? It'll kill your program, right? So please don't do that, right? Don't make mistakes like that. Let's leave it the way it is. Let's just check to test this out. If I was to console.log way down here, right? If I do a console.log, and if I console log alias, right? We should get something weird coming down, right? We'll see what we get at the bottom, right? Okay, so console log alias. Go back to here, refresh, and this is what we get. Take a look, right? We get a part of this whole function. Look, function, and then for debugging only, and it starts typing most of it off, but not the whole thing, right? Why? Because it only can provide so much data. That's what it does, right? Let's do the same thing, right? Instead of alias, let's write to first program. Well, what did I get there? Write to first paragraph, I mean. Right? Huh? I'm just saying I could. I'm going to write to it. It's just I'm pushing it out to the log. I'm pushing it out to log. Let's see what I get, right? Let's see what I get here. Refresh. Same. All right, so it looks like the same. One more time, right? What if I push out something else, right? Like, you know, what if I push out Tom, right, or something else? Can I go further than this, right? I could, right? Hey, here's something. In my scope, we talked about scope. Remember, a variable lives and dies within a curly brace scope somehow, okay? I want you to think of this right now. Do I have access to the variable first paragraph out here inside my IFI? Inside my IFI. Do I have access to my variable, to this variable first paragraph inside my IFI? No, not, it's in here, but outside of this, first paragraph doesn't exist because it lives and dies in this scope. All right, it lives and dies. So if I try and do something like this, first paragraph down here, not write to first paragraph, just first paragraph, right? If I try and do first paragraph in there like this, right? What should I get? Should get undefined. Let's see if I'm right. Okay, let's see if I'm wrong. I go here, refresh. I get this. Man, how did I get this? I shouldn't get this. It says first paragraph. I shouldn't be able to get that at all. Oh wait, look, I even got this thing. I got the whole thing. I can access everything. But you, Tom, you said that I should only have access to it inside that little scope there. How come? How come? I shouldn't be able to get this. A lot of information for first paragraph, no? That's because, and this is where I want you guys to remember this, right? var statements are very dangerous. You may think that the scope is in here, right? But actually, the scope leaks, even inside an IFI like this.
Websites are not in the same shape. What do you change?
You can. I mean, let's say instead of first paragraph, notice I made first paragraph the same as my first paragraph document.getElement by ID, right? That's different. Let's make this something else. Let's make this something short like first P tag, right? We'll call this first paragraph something else. We'll say first P tag, right? Paragraph tag, all right? Just to give it an idea, right? I'll copy this, and I'll put it in here, first P tag, right? And if I go down here and look at first P tag, do I have access to it? Right. Well, I showed you that I can do first paragraph, no problem. So then first P tag should be easy to get as well, right? Let's try it out. So save, refresh. Look, first P tag not defined. How come? I did. I declared it right here. Look, clear down in here. Wait, in here. I declared it right here. First P tag. Right? Well, no, I don't have to. This is right. This is right. It does it still do it? It's alive? Wait, look, it still does. It's alive. No. No, this is correct. I can do this. I've just changed the name of my variable from first paragraph to first p tag, right? And before I was able to see it down here, but now I can't. What if I just type in first paragraph?
Is something which is putting string into.
Well, hold on a second. No, you don't need to do that. So what if I go for first paragraph like this? Will I see it now? Here's first paragraph. First paragraph, right? And if I refresh, hey, look, I can see my first paragraph. In fact, it's alive. It even says it there. How can I get first paragraph when I never declared it? Because it's present. No, it's present in the index.html document. That's why. So this is something to note too. So if I declare a variable, if I declare in my index.html, this is what's confusing. I declared an ID here, a first paragraph. I have access to it directly, right? In my app.js. Be careful. So that's why I named it the same. So it overrides, one overrides the other, right? But I could make it be called first p tag, first paragraph tag, right? Or first para tag, right? Whatever you want to call it. And this anonymous function that's been aliased as right to first paragraph. I know some people might see this as confusing, but this is the way it is, right? Let me just get rid of this. Let me clean this up a little bit, and I'll push it to GitHub for now, so you see what I've got, and you can compare it with your own instead of if I've gone too fast for you, right? And let's get rid of Tom because we don't want to ever put Tom in the wasteland, okay? Tom, right now, he's being eaten by zombies, all right? We don't want to put anything out here. Okay, and so we have two different ways of doing it. Right to first paragraph. We took away our alias. We don't need that. And we're going to try and pump out first paragraph. But first paragraph, the variable has never been declared in our scope ever. Even here, it's been commented out. Okay. Console.log Tom should error out, right? Because that's going to be gone. And we'll just clean up this function here so that way it looks exactly the same. Absolutely. It should. And we'll just copy there so it's the same. Okay, and I'll put this up to GitHub. How do I do it in GitHub? In Visual Studio Code, I click on this little button. And again, for this button to work, you have to have VS Code installed properly. In Visual Studio, obviously, it's a little bit different. I'll do the next example on that, right? And if you notice, I'm going to add this to the staging area, and I'm going to say something like updated app.js as my comment, and click on the check mark, go to the ellipses, and click push. And now my GitHub repository should have my latest code. Let's just test it one more time to make sure that it's all functional. So if I refresh, you can see that I have access to my paragraph tag. Here it is. So why don't I have access to my paragraph tag? Why? Because I've identified it as a first paragraph as an ID. Guys and girls, look, if I didn't have access to first paragraph, could I use CSS? You couldn't, right? So once I declare an ID or a class, it's exposed within my JavaScript file, right? So please don't be confused by that, right? If I want to style first paragraph, just to give you an idea, here's first paragraph. I want to style it. So I want to go back to my index.html. Here's my first paragraph. I want to style it. I want to add a box around it. I want to add a border, right? By old rules, if I go to app.css, and if I do something like this, first paragraph, I can access it here, right? I don't have to declare it in CSS, and I can do something like border, as an example, 1 pixel black solid. I can do that, right? By the way, I could have put some solid 1 pixel black, same. Because border works that way, right? So here's border, 1 pixel black solid, and if I go back here, and if I refresh, you can see that I get 1 pixel black solid around my border, right? So because I can access it here in my CSS with first paragraph, then it's also available in my JavaScript. It's not a trick, because first paragraph is a named ID. Okay. For now, let's just not call it first paragraph. Let's call it, not to confuse you, we'll call it first p tag. First p tag because I've named this first p tag, this variable, right? And it has to be exactly spelled this way because it's case sensitive. If I do this, and if I go back here, and in Chrome and refresh, it's still got the same, but look how it says first p tag is not defined. How come? Because first p tag is inside of this closure, this function. And this function, variables in here live and die in this function. I got other variables, you can see. We know now there's other variables that swim around there. Any ID, any class that I declare in my HTML document is also available in my JavaScript file, right? It's not protected from those things, but I can overwrite them with my own, okay? Dangerous, but you can. But first p tag, not available. And the reason for this is because it's out of scope. Here's the scope of the variable, right? Right to first paragraph. If I want to make it available, how do I make it available? How do I expose a variable outside of this function? I could do a return. That's the way I do it. So if I return a variable, right to first paragraph, if I return a variable, then I can assign it something else. I can assign whatever the output of this variable is. So how about right to first paragraph? Is right to first paragraph exposed in the console? Can I do that in the console? So if I go, let's leave this alone as first p tag, and I'm just going to comment it out, okay, because we can't access it anyway, right? Well, how about this right to first paragraph? This one here, is that exposed in the browser? So if I go back to here, and if I refresh, you see it goes away. And if I go right to first paragraph, right to first paragraph, and if I press enter, it says undefined, right? There's no, it's a reference error. There's nothing that is available. And the reason for this is because right to first paragraph doesn't exist outside of my IFI, right? And this is what I want. I want this to happen. I want right to first paragraph to be enclosed inside of my block, my execution block. All right, so it's preserved. It's behind the wall. Put it that way, right? The wasteland, only zombies live there, right? Right to first paragraph, that exists inside my castle, right? No one can get in there unless I want them to.
So we can inspect the JavaScript code also?
Yes, you can. On the inspector, in the console, yes, you can. And the way to do that, of course, is if I click sources, and if I go to scripts, where I have my JavaScript, and I go to app.js, right? I have it all here. I can look at the app, my JavaScript code in here. Right, so I can look and see what's here. I can't change anything here. Like if I start, well, I could. If I start doing something like this, if I say first p tag, if I declare it as a variable in here, let's try and do this. Var first p tag, check this out. Right here in the browser, first p tag, right? I'm gonna make this equal to Tom, right? And then I haven't saved anything, but I'm writing it. And notice that it's there. It's got this little star over here. And if I press save, right? So I'm trying to save it somehow. Look how it's not working, but just FYI, right? This little star over here. And if I go back to my console and type in first p tag, and press enter, I'm still going to get uncaught, right? And because it says live edit failed, uncaught script not found, right? Well, you can, but not the way I'm doing it.
So if you are opening an online website, as you said, dynamic website, then you can see.
If you see the variable that's not hidden, it's not behind a closure like this one, right? Function the myIFI. If it's there, if it's hidden, I can change everything. I can change. It'll be exposed, right? Especially objects. Objects will be exposed too. All right, questions around this stuff. Sometimes some of this stuff is really confusing at times, and I don't want to confuse you. There's two ways, as a recap, there's two ways to declare functions. Functions work similar to methods in C#, right? Where we declare a block of code that can be reused by calling its name, okay? So anything that's inside the code will be reused, will be executed again and again every time I call it. Yeah. No, there's no access modifiers or anything like that standard in JavaScript. Those are for other languages. Those are for typed languages. JavaScript is a loosely typed language. Remember we talked about this? When I assign something, then I type it right away. I don't declare the type, right? So there's two ways of declaring a function. I can declare it the name way, function, and then the name of the function. And the other way I can do it is by doing it the anonymous way. So I declare a anonymous function first, and then I have a variable that's pointing to that function. I'm going to ask you, like I said, for now, to do it this way. Please do it this way. Okay? Don't do it this way because it can be very confusing for people who are just starting off. So we're going to, for now, we're going to put this in stasis, in cold storage. We're going to come back to it later on. We're going to reanimate it, right, the zombie, and we're going to bring it out and expose it to the world, all right? But for now, we're going to use this person right here, this object, which is write the first paragraph. We're going to use functions, so I want you to do it from now on, and then write the first paragraph. Okay, let's go back to our PowerPoint before we take a short break. So we covered a bunch of stuff from the first PowerPoint. This is the first PowerPoint, right? I just want to make sure that I got everything. So we've got most things. Objects, properties, arguments. We talked about those things. Remember I talked about don't use the write command. Don't use it. Avoid it, right? The other one to really not use is the alert. And I talked about that too. And if I do an alert, so instead of it's alive, my content, but I also do an alert like that, I can do an alert, right? That's built into JavaScript. Sometimes, I'm going to put it this way, like this, in air quotes, okay? Sometimes we use an alert for some debugging, okay? Sometimes. But we never use alerts in a production site because they're really ugly, right? And they make users go crazy. If you see a lot of alerts popping up on your page, pop-ups, first of all, your browser will block it eventually, right? Or it'll be seen as some kind of weird virus, malware, whatever, if you go there enough times. But it looks like this. If I put in something like, this is an alert, you can do that. It's built into JavaScript, right? So this is a built-in function. And if I was to run it again now, if I go here and refresh, you can see that I get this funky alert. Actually, what this is a modal dialog box. It's a modal dialog box, which means I can't continue with my browser or do anything here at all. I mean, I can do this, but I can't really continue without clicking OK. No, unless I tell it to repeat. Yeah. So if I press it away, it's gone, and I can see that it's executing our write to first paragraph. Yeah. So if I refresh, it's going to come up again. And see how it says, if I refresh again, look, it says prevent this page from creating additional dialogues. Right? Yes.
Isn't that one of those things that you got to pop up and you try to close it and it asks you, are you sure you want to close this? Are you sure?
Isn't that ugly? Isn't that annoying? Yeah, you don't want to make your users annoyed with you, right? We talked about this the other day, right? On Monday, we said, if the users wait more than 10 seconds, they never come back, right? For anything, right? So you don't want them to ever do that, right? So let's get rid of this thing. All right, so alerts are okay. We can use alerts. We don't use document.write. Document.write destroys the document, right? It doesn't tell you where it writes it. Here's an example of this. So here's it's alive and blah, blah, blah. I'm going to write something else in the document. I'm going to use document.write right after everything else, right? I'm going to say my document, document will be destroyed. Furious will be destroyed. Almost like a death message, right? If I use this, document.write, just to show you what I'm talking about here. And if I refresh, right? So refresh the document, my document will be destroyed is there, right? So live is there, my document will be destroyed is there. And if I right-click and inspect the element, see what I get, right? I get my head and my body, and notice that I get my document will be destroyed, right? Right at the end, right? Notice that? And quotations are big. It's a big section. Huh? Well, all I'm saying is it just added it in right after my JavaScript code. Take a look, right? So please, it does weird things, right? I don't recommend it. Please don't do it. It can mess up your document. It's not recommended for regular coding. We never use it to inject code or anything like this into our document. For debugging purposes, some people say, well, I got an email like this. Well, Tom, don't we use document.write for debugging? You can use it for debugging, but I'm never going to use it for debugging because if I forget it, it's there for good. If I forget a console.log, right, it's just going to be hidden from most users. They won't know to go to the console, right? So it's hidden. It's still running and it's still debugging, but no one knows that I'm doing that, typically, the average user, right? But that can mess you up. You'll be like, oh my God, why does my page not work? Because you left the document.write in your page, right? Don't do that, please. Take them away, right? And so that's why we don't use these, okay? Document.writes. I've covered some of the other stuff anyway, just by talking about it. Everything's lowercase, commenting. This is all stuff from last time. Here's something that you should know is variable names. These are some restricted words or already reserved words, if you will. Abstract, Boolean. One of them was number. I used number the other day, and it was totally by accident. It's not here, but number is a reserved word. We don't want to use that for any reason, right? No, it's just for this thing. So, but these are the official reserved word lists, and there's more of these. You can actually look up the complete list online of other words, like even things like class now is reserved. Class because of our new ES6. ECMAScript 6 uses class, right? So you can't use class as a variable name. C# it's very similar to C#. The reserved list is very similar to this list you're seeing in C# and Java or any other programming language. So if it's not going to work in C# or Java, chances are it won't work in JavaScript either. Please don't use them. I'll answer you after. Let me just go through this first, and we'll take a short break. So again, we talked about variable names, assigning variables really quickly. This has a bunch of document.writes. Please don't do document.writes, right? Inside your, even if it's inside your PowerPoint presentation, I don't want you to do it. Adding and subtracting, all the regular things we do for manipulation of addition and subtraction, the same operators that we use, you know, as an example, are the same ones we would use in JavaScript. So plus, minus, star for multiplication, slash for division, %sign for mod, all those things are the same operators that we use almost in any language. Any C-style, C-influenced language, the same operators, right? The for loop in JavaScript is almost exactly the same as you see in Java and in C# and other languages, okay? For loop. Same thing with the while loop. Same thing with the switch statement. Now that you know that, you know JavaScript a lot more than you think you know it. If you can do a for loop, switch statement, or if statement in other languages, you can do it here with some minor modifications, right? So I want you to think of it that way as well. One thing that this first PowerPoint has, which goes overboard a little bit for me, is the idea that you can do certain events. And there's different ways of doing event handling, and they introduce it here in the first day. I didn't introduce it to you, but these are some typical events. Like, for example, the click event, right? If I click on a button or something like that. And there's different ways to access events. We're going to cover events later on in the course. I'm not going to go over that right now. And then also things like events that are related to different elements. Like, for example, the anchor tag event has on focus, on blur, on click, and so on. There's a bunch of different events that are related. These are events that are going to be raised when different things happen, different behavior, when you do different behavior on a particular element. Now, if you've never done event handling, and most likely most of you, maybe only one of you has, or two of you, haven't done event handling before, then events is like, what are events, right? Think about something. If I manipulate a page, right? When I hover over something, I'm raising an event. When I click on a button, I raise an event. When I scroll down the page, I raise an event. Pretty much anything you do on the page with your mouse cursor or your keyboard, you're raising an event, right? Most of them are ignored, right? Unless we set up a listener for them. That's what I want you to know for today. I need to set up a listener, and then I can handle the event later on. All right? Hold your questions, then I'll come back in a bit. So this is the first PowerPoint talks about this kind of stuff and some common libraries. One of the libraries we're going to be exploring in this course is jQuery later on in the course, right? Towards the end, we're going to hit jQuery. It's a shortcut library to help us with JavaScript and Ajax, okay? We're going to do with that. Some of the other ones, AngularJS is a really popular front-end library, React.js as well. Node.js is a back-end library, Backbone. Those are all common libraries you'll see today, all right? I'm not going to quiz you on these things or even test you, but you should have heard these things. And I'm definitely not going to talk to you about this PC data, right? We're not going to touch this stuff. We don't use it today in modern JavaScript, so we're going to leave it alone. That's PowerPoint 1. Let's take a short break, and when we come back, I'll show up everything we need to know for functions, okay?